The great hall was silent now. It was a different kind of silence. Not the empty silence of before a show, full of anticipation, but the heavy, satisfied silence that comes after the last note has faded and the people have gone home. It was the silence Leo knew best. He pushed his wide, soft-bristled broom across the marble floor of the lobby. The only sounds were the gentle asterisk swish asterisk of the bristles, and the distant hum of the floor polisher, operated by his co-worker, an older man who preferred the company of machines to people. Leo didn't mind. He liked the quiet. It gave him space to think, or better yet, not to think at all. He was a man built for shadows and in-between spaces, middle-aged, with hair that was more gray than brown, and hands that were broad and strong, with short, practical nails. He wore the standard issue navy blue uniform of the custodial staff, his name stitched in white thread over the pocket, Leo ***. Few people ever read it. To the world of the Crescendo Music Hall, Leo was part of the furniture. He was the man who made the brass railings shine, who ensured no gum was stuck under the plush red velvet seats, who made the grand staircase's marble steps gleam under the crystal chandeliers. He was a utility, like the lights or the air conditioning necessary, but unnoticeable until something went wrong. The musicians, the patrons, the conductors, they flowed around him like water around a stone. Sometimes a well-meaning older lady would smile and say, "Good evening," and he would nod softly in return. But most, especially the younger, brighter stars, looked right through him. Their minds were on arpeggios and adagios, not on the man emptying the trash bin of their discarded coffee cups and scribbled on sheet music. His boss, the head custodian, was a practical man. "Our job, Leo," he'd said on his first day, "is to be ghosts. We clean up the mess of beauty. We disappear before the beauty comes back. That's the deal." Leo was good at being a ghost. Tonight, however, the usual post-performance calm was different. A special event had taken place, the regional Young Virtuosos competition. The winners, a trio of teenagers, were still buzzing with adrenaline and the thrill of victory. They had commandeered the stage for an impromptu, celebratory playthrough, their laughter echoing in the empty 1,500-seat auditorium. Leo moved quietly into the back of the hall, starting his routine of checking seats for lost items. The trio of violinist, a cellist, and a pianist were gathered around the majestic Steinway concert grand, the crown jewel of the crescendo. The pianist, a boy with floppy hair, was shaking his hands out. "My fingers are still cramping from that finale," the boy groaned, though he was clearly thrilled. "It was that wild run in the third movement of the Rachmaninoff," said the violinist, a girl with her instrument tucked under her chin. "The asterisk piano trio, no to asterisk. The way the piano and violin spiral together. I thought I was going to mess up the entrance every single time." They began to debate a specific, notoriously tricky passage. The pianist attempted it, fumbled the complex hand-over-hand arpeggio, and laughed. "See, it's a monster." The cellist joined in, humming his part. They were talking a language of measured numbers and dynamic markings *fortissimo here, a *retardando there. It was lively, intellectual, and full of the unshakable confidence of youth who had just been told they were the best. Leo continued his work, his head down, but his ears, trained by a lifetime of listening, followed their conversation. He knew the piece. He knew exactly the passage they were struggling to describe. The music played clearly in his mind, a perfect, private recording. Without thinking, absorbed in the memory of the sound, he murmured the solution aloud, softly, to the empty air next to him. "It's not a pull, it's a fall. You have to let the left hand fall into the bass note, like a sigh. Then the right hand isn't chasing, it's catching up." His voice was a low, rough gravel, unused for hours. It wasn't meant to be heard, but in a lull in the teenager's chatter, it carried. The violinist's head snapped up. She peered into the dimness of the back rows. "Hello, who said that?" Leo froze, clutching a lost playbill he'd just retrieved. He wished he could melt into the velvet. The pianist squinted. "Oh, it's just the janitor." The word wasn't said with malice, just with the bland factuality of someone stating the obvious. A cat is a cat. A chair is a chair. A janitor is a janitor. But the violinist smirked, curiosity turning to gentle mockery. "Wait, don't tell me you have an opinion on Rachmaninoff?" She said it like one might ask a dog its opinion on astrophysics. The trio giggled, a light, breezy sound that felt heavier than any insult. Leo felt his face grow warm. He shook his head, muttering, "Just talking to myself." He turned to go. to retreat to the safety of the Labus whispering silence. That's when he arrived. Maestro Sterling's footsteps were distinctive, a firm, rhythmic tap that announced authority. He was the Crescendo's artistic director in residence, a man whose very presence seemed to tighten the air. In his 60s, with a magnificent sweep of silver hair and a permanent expression of discerning criticism, he was a figure of immense respect and fear. "Why is there still noise in my hall?" he boomed, though a faint smile played on his lips for his prized students. Then his eyes, sharp and hawk-like, landed on Leo, who was caught halfway up the aisle, an awkward statue holding a piece of trash. "What is going on here?" Sterling asked, his tone cooler. The floppy-haired pianist grinned. "The janitor was trying to give us notes on the trio, Maestro." Maestro Sterling's eyebrow arched so high it nearly vanished into his hairline. He looked Leo up and down, a slow, deliberate scan that took in the worn uniform, the practical boots, the hands that were not an artist's hands. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. He walked slowly down the aisle until he stood a few feet from Leo. He didn't shout. His voice was quiet, precise, and all the more cutting for it. "Let me explain something to you," Sterling said, each word like a drop of ice water. He gestured expansively to the stage, the piano, the gilded hall. "This is a temple. That instrument is its altar. What we create here is not, ***. He paused, letting the word hang. "It is not something to be wiped away. It is breathed into life by talent, by years of sacrifice, by a spark that is given to very, very few." He took a step closer. Leo could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp. "You have a job," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that the straining teenagers could still easily hear. "A good, honest job. You make the place look nice for the people who actually matter, the people who understand ***. The piano is not a toy for everyone. Some are meant to listen." He pointed a long, elegant finger at Leo's chest. "Others are meant to clean. So, do us all a favor. Stick to your cloth." He held Leo's gaze for a second longer, ensuring the lesson had sunk in, then turned his back, a definitive dismissal. His voice warmed instantly as he addressed the trio. "Now, you brilliant creatures, let's go get some supper. We have real work to discuss." The teenagers gathered their things, throwing a few last, curious glances at Leo, who hadn't moved. They followed the maestro out, their excited chatter fading down the hallway until it was swallowed by the closing of a heavy door. Then, there was only the silence again. The heavy, hollow silence. Leo stood there for a long time. The lost playbill was crumpled in his fist. He looked at the stage, at the magnificent piano sitting under a single, lonely work light. It seemed a mile away. Finally, he moved. He walked slowly, deliberately, to the custodial closet off the lobby. He didn't slam the door. He never made loud noises. He opened it, stepped inside the small, brightly lit space smelling of soap and bleach, and closed the door softly behind him. He leaned against the steel shelving unit, his head bowed. The humiliation was a hot coal in his stomach. But deeper than that, far deeper, was a colder, older feeling. A feeling of a door being closed. A feeling he knew very well. He took a slow, shuddering breath and reached for his locker. He dialed the simple combination lock, opened the small, dented metal door, and reached inside. Past his lunchbox, past an extra pair of socks, his fingers found what they were looking for. It was a photograph, faded and bent at the corners from years of being tucked away. He didn't need to look at it. He knew every pixel by heart. But he pulled it out anyway. It showed a small, sunny living room from another era. A boy of about 10 sat at an upright piano, his face turned to the camera, beaming with a joy so pure it was almost painful to see. Beside him, her hand resting gently on his small shoulder, was a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. His mother. The ghost in the music hall looked at the ghost in the photograph, and for just a moment, in the fluorescent glare of the cleaning closet, he wasn't a ghost at all. He was that boy, and the music wasn't a locked door. It was the sunlight in that room, waiting for him to come back home. He carefully, reverently, placed the photograph back in its hiding place. He closed the locker door. The click of the latch final in the quiet room died out in the hall. The grand piano waited in the half-light, silent and unknowing. The maestro's words still hung in the air. Stick to your cloth. Leo picked up his polishing cloth from the counter. It was soft, white, and lint-free. He looked at it, then at his own rough hands. He folded the cloth neatly and put it in his pocket. He had a lot of work to do. The temple wasn't going to clean itself. The closet was quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent light overhead, a sound so constant Leo usually didn't hear it. But he heard it now. It buzzed in his ears, mixing with the echo of the maestro's words, "Stick to your cloth." He looked down at his hands. They were good hands, strong, capable. They could unclog a drain, lift heavy bags of trash, buff a floor to a mirror shine. They were a working man's hands. But as he turned them over, looking at the lines on his palms, he saw other things. He saw the faint, old calluses in different places, ones that had nothing to do with a mop handle. He saw the span of his fingers, wide and flexible. He let out a long, slow breath, the tightness in his chest loosening just a little. The hot shame from the hall was cooling, settling into a dull, familiar ache. This wasn't a new feeling. It was an old friend, this feeling of being unseen. He had carried it for decades. He didn't go back to sweeping right away. Instead, he sat down on the small, wobbly stool by the sink. He reached into his locker. Again, not for the photograph this time, but for a plain, black lunchbox. He opened it. Inside, next to an apple and a wrapped sandwich, was a small, zippered leather pouch, worn soft with age. It was the kind meant for holding pencils or glasses. He unzipped it slowly, almost ceremoniously. Inside wasn't a pencil. It was a single, well-used piano key, not a real one from a piano, but a practice key, made of wood and ivory-colored plastic, mounted on a small, heavy block. It was smooth from thousands, maybe millions, of touches. He took it out and laid it flat on his palm. Its weight was a comfort. His thumb brushed over the cool surface. Then, almost without thinking, his fingers began to move. His hand rested on his knee, and his fingers index, middle, ring pressed down on the imaginary keys in a silent, fluid sequence. A scale, then a broken chord. His wrist turned with a subtle, practiced grace that belonged to a different world than the one he mopped floors in. No sound came out, but in his mind, the music was perfect, clear, and bright. This was his secret. This was how he fed the hunger. The memory came, not as a sharp pain, but as a tide, washing over him in the sterile light of the cleaning closet. He saw the small, sun-filled room from the photograph. It smelled of lemon polish and old books. The upright piano was a dark, warm brown, and on top of it sat a metronome with a silent, sleeping pendulum. His mother was there. She wasn't a famous teacher. She was just a woman who loved music and saw something in her quiet son. "Don't fight the keys, my love," she would say, her voice soft as she stood behind him. "Let your fingers fall, like leaves. The sound is already in the piano. You're just asking it to come out." She taught him to listen first, to hear the music in his head before he tried to make it with his hands. She called it singing. Inside, they had no money for fancy lessons or grand instruments, but it didn't matter. For a few years, that room was his whole universe. He wasn't a prodigy in the magazine sense. He was something pure. He was a boy who spoke more easily through music than words. He understood it, not as notes on a page, but as a language of feeling. Sadness had a certain weight, a slow, descending walk. Joy was a sparkle, a quick, dancing run up the keys. He would play for hours, lost in it. His mother would listen from the kitchen, humming along. Sometimes she'd cry, not from sadness, but from the beauty of it. "You have a gift, Leo," she'd whisper, kissing the top of his head. "A real gift. Don't ever let it get dusty." Then, the winter came. The sharp, cold one when he was 12. The flu, the doctors said. But it was more than that. It was a silence that fell over the house and never lifted. The piano, with its silent keys, became a giant, hulking piece of furniture that only reminded him of the song that was missing. There were no more lessons, no more listening. Relatives came, their faces pinched with worry. Words were spoken in low tones he wasn't supposed to hear. "What will we do with the boy? Such a pity. And the one that sealed his fate. We'll have to sell it. We need the money. He was there the day the two men came to take the piano away." He watched from the top of the stairs as they wrapped thick canvas straps around it, grunting with the effort. He saw the dark, polished wood scrape against the doorframe, leaving a pale, jagged scar. He saw the spot where it had sat, now just a rectangle of less faded carpet, and for indentations in the floor. The music didn't leave him. It got trapped inside. It became a ghost living in his ribs. Life, as it does, moved on in a more practical direction. School ended, work began. Jobs came and went: warehouse, factory, delivery. He was always reliable, always quiet, always the one who didn't mind the night shift. The solitude suited the ghost inside. And then, 5 years ago, he'd gotten this job. The crescendo. At first, it was just another building to clean. But then he was assigned to the main hall. He saw the Steinway. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. A creature of curved, glossy wood and gleaming gold lettering. His task was to dust it, to polish its ebony and ivory keys with a special, gentle cloth. The first time he touched it, just a brief, careful stroke across the middle C, a shock went through him. It wasn't electricity, it was memory, it was home. He learned the routines. He knew when the last rehearsal ended, when the security guard did his rounds. He learned to become even more of a ghost, moving so silently even the mice in the walls didn't startle. And he began to steal moments, not to play whole songs, that was too risky, the sound would carry. But he could practice the asterisk feel asterisk, late at night, with the hall in utter darkness save for the red exit signs. He would lift the fallboard without a sound. He would lay his hands on the keys, not pressing them down, just feeling their cool smoothness under his fingertips. He would go through the motions of a piece he remembered, his fingers dancing in perfect, silent pantomime an inch above the strings. He built the muscle memory, note by note, in total silence. Other times, on his lunch break, he'd sit in the very last row of the empty balcony. From there, he could watch the rehearsals. He saw Maestro Sterling rage and inspire. He saw young musicians struggle and triumph. He heard the same passage played a dozen times until it was right. He learned more in those stolen hours of listening than most students did in years of lessons. He came to understand Sterling's genius, his relentless pursuit of a certain sound. He also saw his cruelty, his impatience with anything he deemed ordinary. Leo's knowledge became deep, but it was a secret library, a vault no one knew existed. He could look at a complex piece of sheet music left on a stand and hear it in his head. He understood why a musician was struggling with a phrase, but his opinion, his understanding, was worth less than the dust he wiped away. He was the silent witness to a world he could never be part of. The old calluses on his fingers were from this, from gripping the handle of a buffer, from squeezing a rag. The calluses a pianist gets were different, softer, in different spots. His had faded long ago, replaced by these new, harder ones. He looked at the practice key in his hand. It was a piece of a puzzle that would never be whole, a single note from a song that would never be sung. He thought of his mother's words, asterisk don't ever let it get dusty, asterisk he hadn't. He'd kept it polished, but he'd kept it locked away. It was a treasure buried so deep even he sometimes forgot it was there. Until moments like tonight, when it tried to whisper, and was shouted down. He put the practice key back in its pouch, zipped it up, and placed it carefully in the lunchbox. He put the lunchbox back in the locker and shut the door. The click was final. He stood up, his knees creaking a little. He took the soft, white polishing cloth from his pocket. He unfolded it, looked at it for a long moment, then draped it over his shoulder. He had a job to do. The temple awaited its ghost. He turned off the light in the closet and stepped back into the quiet darkness of the hall. The grand piano was just a shape in the gloom. He walked toward it, not to play, but to clean. He had a cloth, and he would stick to it. But as he began to wipe the gleaming wood of the piano's lid, his movements slow and careful, a single, rebellious thought echoed in the silent vault of his mind. It was just one thought, clear and sharp as the first note of a song waiting to be born. Asterisk, but I remembered asterisk. The silence after the maestro's words didn't leave. It followed Leo round like a shadow for the next week. It was in the swish of his broom, the gurgle of his floor cleaner, the soft squeak of his cart's wheels on the marble. The other cleaners noticed he was quieter, if that was even possible. He did his work, same as always, perfect and invisible. But the air around him felt different, like a cup filled to the very brim, waiting for one more drop to spill over. Maestro Sterling and the young trio didn't ignore him. They just didn't see him at all. They had moved on. Their world was full of bright, loud things, new pieces to learn, a planned performance for important donors. Leo was once again part of the furniture, a ghost in the background of their brilliant lives. The incident in the hall was a forgotten joke, a tiny ripple that had smoothed out completely. For them, for Leo, the ripple had become a wave, crashing silently inside his chest. He found himself looking at the piano more, not with longing, exactly, but with a strange kind of recognition. It was like looking at a locked door and finally admitting you had a key buried in your pocket, a key you'd sworn never to use. The week wore on. Then, on a Thursday, the hall was booked for a long, intensive rehearsal for the donor concert. It was a big program, a mix of orchestra and solo pieces. Leo listened from his usual spot in the back as they struggled through a particularly modern, chaotic piece. The maestro's temper was shorter than usual. He stopped the orchestra again and again, his voice sharp with frustration. "No, it's not anger, it's despair. The notes are clawing their way out. You sound like you're reading a grocery list." Again, from the brass entrance. Leo understood. The piece was supposed to sound like breaking glass, like a fever dream. The musicians were playing the notes correctly, but they were afraid of the feeling. He watched the maestro, a man who could hear the soul of a piece, but couldn't always find the words to pull it out of. Others, for a fleeting second, Leo felt a pang of something like pity for him. The rehearsal ran late, and by the end, everyone was exhausted and tense. The musicians packed up quickly, eager to escape the maestro's simmering mood. Sterling himself left in a hurry, snapping his briefcase shut and marching up the aisle without a backward glance. The usual post-rehearsal chatter was absent. They left behind a hall thrumming with negative energy and, as usual, a mess. When Leo entered an hour later to begin his work, the stage was a disaster. Metal music stands were scattered like lonely skeletons. Chairs were left out of place. Sheet music was everywhere on the floor, on seats, draped over the piano. The grand piano itself was littered with scores. He began his methodical cleanup. He righted the stands, folded the chairs, and gathered the sheets of music into neat piles. He was careful, knowing that to a musician, a misplaced page was a catastrophe. As he cleared the piano's lid, his hand brushed against a single, heavy book left open on the stand. It wasn't the orchestra's music. It was a solo piano piece. The title at the top of the page was in bold, foreign letters, but he knew it. Asterisk asterisk vers la flamme asterisk 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 toward the flame asterisk. By Scriabin, his breath caught. This was no gentle sonata. It was a monster, a torrential, technically terrifying work that was as much about wild emotion as it was about sheer physical skill. It was a piece that didn't just ask for feeling. It demanded a fight. It was the kind of piece only the most fearless pianists attempted. Why was it here? The donor concert program didn't include it. Then he saw the note. It was a small, crisp piece of the maestro's personal stationery, folded and tucked into the spine of the book. Written in that familiar, flamboyant script, the ink dark and decisive, was a message. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It just said, asterisk, let's see the janitor's opinion on this, asterisk. For a moment, Leo just stared. The words didn't make sense. Then they did, and a cold understanding settled in his stomach. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate, cruel joke. The maestro hadn't forgotten the incident. He'd simply saved his retaliation for later. He must have placed this here himself after everyone left. It was a final, definitive dismissal. A punchline. Asterisk, you think you know music? Try this. This is real music. This is my world. You could never even read the first page. Asterisk. Leo's face grew warm, then hot. He looked around the empty, silent hall. The joke echoed in the vast space, mocking him. He imagined the maestro showing it to the young trio, maybe even to other musicians. Asterisk. Look what I left for the cleaning man. A little puzzle for him to ponder while he dusts. Asterisk. The humiliation from the previous week came rushing back, but it was different now. It wasn't hot shame anymore. It was a cold, hard stone. It was anger, but a quiet, deep anger that had been simmering for 30 years. Anger at the men who took the piano away. Anger at a life that had turned so practical. Anger at being a ghost in a place that worshipped sound. And now, anger at this man who thought he could define what beauty was and who was allowed near it. He looked at the piano. The single work light above it cast a dramatic pool of light, leaving the rest of the stage in darkness. The sheet music seemed to glow under the beam. The taunting note was a white flag of surrender he was expected to wave. He thought of his mother, not her gentle smile, but the fire in her eyes when she played a passionate piece. Music isn't always pretty, Leo, she'd said once. Sometimes it's a storm. You have to let it roar. He thought of the silent decades, the stolen moments of pantomime on these very keys, the library of music in his head, listened to but never spoken, the ghost inside his ribs, rattling its chains. The cold stone of his anger began to heat up. It turned into a single, clear, burning point of decision. This wasn't about proving the maestro wrong. That man would never understand. This wasn't about showing off to those kids. They lived in a different universe. This was about the ghost. This was about the key in his pocket. This was about a boy in a sunlit room who had been told he had a gift, and who had spent a lifetime pretending that gift didn't exist. The door was locked. The joke was the lock. And for the first time in his adult life, Leo decided he was going to use the key. He didn't throw down his polishing cloth. He didn't make a grand gesture. He simply placed it, neatly folded, on the corner of the piano's lid. He picked up the maestro's note, looked at the elegant, mocking handwriting for a final second, and put it in his pocket. Then, he did something he had never allowed himself to do. He walked around to the front of the piano. He looked at the bench. It was just a polished wooden stool, but it might as well have been the edge of a cliff. He pulled it out. The legs scraped softly on the stage floor, a sound that seemed incredibly loud in the silence. He sat down. The feel of the bench was strange. It was too low. Pianists always adjusted the bench. It was the first thing you did. His body remembered. He stood back up, turned the knobs on the side, and raised it to a height that felt right. He sat again. Better. The piano stretched out before him, a landscape of black and white. The open music book was a map to a storm. He could feel the eyes of the empty, dark seats upon him. 1,000 ghosts of past audiences. The ghost of his mother. The ghost of the boy he had been. He looked at the first page of Verse La Flamme. The notes were dense, a chaotic swarm of ink. His eyes, unused to reading formally for so long, scanned it. But his mind didn't read the notes one by one. It heard them. It absorbed the block of sound, the dizzying climbs, the crashing bass chords. He turned the page slowly, then the next. He wasn't learning it. He was remembering it. He was letting the storm gather in his mind. He reached out. His broad, work-roughened hands hovered over the keys. They were trembling, not from fear, but from a lifetime of suppression. He closed his eyes. He heard his mother's voice. Asterisk, let your fingers fall, like leaves. The sound is already in the piano. You're just asking it to come out. Asterisk. He took a deep, shuddering breath that filled the very bottom of his lungs. He let it out slowly. The trembling in his hand stopped. He opened his eyes. They were clear and focused. He looked at the first, thick bass note he needed to play. It was the beginning of everything. The first step toward the flame. In the profound silence of the deserted hall, Leo lowered his hands. The space between his hovering hands and the ivory keys seemed to last forever. It was a canyon he had spent a lifetime afraid to cross. In that suspended moment, every doubt, every taunt, every year of silence screamed at him to stop, to get up, to go back to his cloth. But deeper than the noise was a pull, a gravitational force from the heart of the instrument itself. It was the same pull he'd felt as a boy, the one that made hours feel like minutes. It was quieter than the doubts, but it was infinitely stronger. His left hand descended first, not a timid tap, not a testing poke. It was a deliberate, controlled fall, the full weight of his arm behind it, guided by a wrist that remembered a truth his mind had tried to forget. The note was a low C, deep in the bass clef. It was not just a sound, it was an event. In the absolute silence of the empty hall, the note bloomed. It started as a solid, round core of tone. Then it expanded. It vibrated up through the pedals under his feet, through the bench, into his bones. It filled the cavernous space, rolling up to the highest balcony like thunder heard from a distance. It was a sound of profound gravity, of something ancient being awakened. That single note held within it the memory of every piano that had ever been played, and the silence of everyone that had been taken away. Before its rich echo could fully fade, his right hand joined, not chasing, not scrambling. It answered a cluster of higher, shimmering notes, strange and dissonant, like seeing light fracture through a cracked window. The language of the piece was not melody as most people knew it. It was atmosphere. It was unease. It was a distant, flickering heat. Leo was not playing the notes yet. He was awakening the mood. His body leaned forward slightly, his head tilted as if listening to a voice only he could hear coming from inside the piano. His fingers, which looked too thick and rough for such delicate work, moved with a shocking, spider-like agility. They knew where to go. Decades of silent practice on these very keys, of mental rehearsal in the dark, had wired the map into his muscles. He began the first real climb up the keyboard. The left hand began a rumbling, restless pattern deep down, a seismic disturbance. The right hand launched into a frantic, spiraling ascent of notes, each one biting into the next. It was technically ferocious, a run that made the fingers of a conservatory student cramp just to look at. Leo didn't seem to be thinking about the difficulty. His face was a mask of intense concentration, but not struggle. It was the look of a man finally doing the one thing he was meant to do. There was a raw, physical power to his playing, He wasn't a delicate artist coaxing out pretty sounds. He was a miner, digging for something buried deep in the earth of the music. He attacked the keys. But it wasn't an angry attack. It was a determined, relentless uncovering. The music Scriabin wrote was obsessive. It circled around the same few terrifying ideas, getting louder, wilder, more dissonant each time. Asterisk toward the flame. Asterisk, it was about being hypnotized by a destroying light. Leo understood this in his bones. His life had been a circling around a silent, destroying beauty. Now he was playing the spiral. He reached a crashing chord, both fists coming down onto the keyboard in a brutal, glorious crash. The sound was shocking, a wave of noise that should have felt violent. But coming from him, it felt earned, it felt like truth. The piano shook, the sheet music on the stand fluttered. He didn't pause. He drove forward. The piece demanded a trill, a rapid trembling back and forth between two notes with the weakest fingers of the right hand. A notoriously exhausting technique. Leo's trill wasn't neat and polished, it was frantic. A trapped bird beating its wings against glass. It was more expressive because of its imperfection. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. A lock of gray hair fell across his eyes. He didn't brush it away. He was in the storm now. The world had shrunk to the circle of light on the music. The feel of the keys under his fingers, and the roaring in his ears that was part sound, part memory, part sheer, unleashed emotion. He played the passages of quiet, eerie mystery, not with soft delicacy, but with a held-breath tension that was even more gripping. His left hand would creep through a dark, rumbling passage while his right hand plucked out single, high, bell-like notes that hung in the air like stars in a smothering darkness. The contrast was breathtaking. He wasn't just playing loud and soft. He was playing hope and despair, memory and loss. As the piece coiled back toward its final, catastrophic climax, something broke open in his playing. The careful control, the focused technique, began to fuse with something wilder and older. It was the gift his mother had seen, the untamed understanding of emotion as sound. The notes became cries, the chords became collapsing buildings. The frantic runs were the sound of a mind, of a heart, racing toward its own end. He was breathing hard now, his shoulders rising and falling. The physical effort was immense. This was a piece that broke pianists. But he played through the burn in his forearms, the ache in his back. This was his one chance. He would play until his fingers bled or the music ended, whichever came first. The final page, the flame, the music notation was almost a solid block of ink, a chaotic to play as many notes as humanly possible, as fast and as loudly as possible. It was a musical inferno. Leo leaned his whole body into the keyboard. His hands were a blur, a machine of flesh and bone driving the great steel harp of the piano to its limit. The sound was no longer just musical notes, it was a cataclysm, an avalanche of roaring bass, shrieking treble, and pounding rhythm. It was every silent year, every unheard note, every dismissive glance, every time he'd been told to stick to his cloth, all exploding out of him in a torrent of glorious, terrifying noise. He held the last, crushing, dissonant chord, his feet pressing the sustain pedal deep, letting every string in the piano vibrate in furious agreement. And then silence. A different silence, not the empty silence from before. This was a silence he had made asterisk. It was a silence full of the ghost of sound, vibrating in the air, ringing in the ears. It was an exhausted, triumphant, devastated silence. His hands, still pressed into the keys, went limp. His head dropped forward, his chin nearly touching his chest. His shoulders sagged. Sweat dripped from his nose onto the ivory below. He was utterly spent, hollowed out. The ghost was gone. It had been set free. He sat there in the pool of light, in the ringing aftermath, not moving. He had done it. He had spoken the unspeakable. Nothing else mattered. No opinion, no joke. No maestro in the world could take this moment away from him. He had, for the first time in 30 years, answered the call. He had played toward the flame, and for a few minutes, he had burned brighter than anyone could have imagined. He slowly lifted his hands from the keyboard. They were trembling again, but now with fatigue and release. He placed them gently in his lap, staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. They were the same hands that held a mop, that polished brass, but they were also, irrevocably, the hands that had just done this, in the deep shadow at the very back of the hall, where the exit door was almost invisible. A figure stood perfectly still, one hand frozen on the heavy door handle he had been about to push open. Maestro Sterling had returned. He'd been halfway to his car when a cold knot of dread had formed in his stomach. His scorebook, his personal, annotated scorebook for the donor concert. He'd left it on the conductor's stand. He couldn't rehearse tomorrow without it. Grumbling, furious at his own forgetfulness, he had turned back. He had entered the hall through the back service entrance, his footsteps silent on the carpeted aisle. He was about to call out for the janitor to turn on a stage light when he heard it. Not the first note. He'd heard the first note from the lobby, and it had stopped him dead. It was a note of such shocking authority and depth that his professional curiosity had been instantly sparked. Who is in my hall? He had crept to the back doorway, a trespasser in his own temple. And then he saw the janitor on the bench. His spine had gone rigid with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. This was a desecration. But then the janitor began to play, really play, and the outrage had died, smothered in its crib by sheer, unadulterated shock. Sterling had heard this piece performed by masters. He had analyzed it, measure by measure. He knew its every pitfall and triumph. What he was hearing was not a master's performance. It was something else. It was rough in places, technically unrefined, but it had a raw, emotional truth that made his skin prickle. He heard the struggle, the decades of pent-up music, the untamed understanding in the way Leo leaned into the dissonance, as if he found comfort in the discord. This wasn't an interpretation. It was a confession played on a piano. He watched, utterly forgotten, as the man poured out a lifetime onto the keys. He saw the sweat, the trembling focus, the total physical and emotional surrender. He, who had spent his life chasing perfection of sound, was witnessing the perfection of feeling, as the final cataclysm of sound erupted and then faded into that profound, charged silence. Maestro Sterling found he had stopped breathing. His hand was clenched so hard on the door handle his knuckles were white. A single, traitorous thought cleaved through his professional mind, sharp and humbling. I have never played it like that. I could never play it like that. He stood in the dark, a statue, watching the spent figure under the light. The janitor, Leo, the man he had told to stick to. The silence was a living thing. It pressed in from the dark corners of the hall. But it was a different pressure now. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was the ghost of the music, still vibrating in the wood of the stage, in the strings of the piano, in the very bones of the man who sat before it. Leo didn't know how long he sat there. Time had dissolved in the storm of the music. He was aware only of the cool touch of the ivory under his sweating fingertips, the slow, heavy beating of his own heart, and a feeling of absolute emptiness that was not sad, but peaceful. He had poured everything out. There was nothing left inside him but a quiet, hollow calm. Slowly, with a stiffness that spoke of both physical exhaustion and the weight of the moment, he lifted his hands from his lap. He reached out and gently closed the fallboard over the keys. The soft thump was the gentlest sound imaginable after the roar that had come before. It was a goodbye. He didn't look at the sheet music. He didn't look at the empty seats. He looked at his hands, resting now on the dark, polished wood. They were just his hands again. The instruments were quiet. A sound broke the silence. It wasn't a loud sound. It was the faint, slow creak of a heavy door swinging on its hinges, followed by the softest click of it closing. Leo's head came up. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew. The air in the hall had changed. He was no longer alone. The realization didn't bring panic. The part of him that cared about being caught, about being in trouble, had been burned away in the music. He felt a strange, detached curiosity. Who was it? The night watchman? Another cleaner? He heard footsteps. Not the brisk, confident tap of the maestro, but slow, hesitant steps on the carpeted aisle. They came closer, then stopped about halfway down the hall. Leo finally turned, standing in the dim light, his silver hair faintly illuminated by the glow from the stage, was Maestro Sterling. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. He looked older, and in the shadows, he looked uncertain. He held a leather scorebook against his chest like a shield. He was just standing there, staring at the stage. For a long moment, neither man moved or spoke. They were two figures in a vast, dark space, connected by a bridge of shattered silence. Leo waited. He felt nothing. No anger, no pride, no fear. He was just tired. It was the maestro who broke. His shoulders, usually held so straight and proud, slumped a little. He took a few more steps forward, until he was at the edge of the light, his face now visible. His expression was one Leo had never seen on him before. It wasn't anger or contempt. It was a kind of shattered awe, mixed with a deep, profound confusion. You? Sterling's voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. It cracked on the single word. He cleared his throat, tried again. You played Scriabin's first La Flamme. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of impossible fact. Leo simply nodded. He didn't trust his own voice. How? The word burst out of Sterling, charged with a lifetime of professional obsession. You have no training. You clean. Leo looked at his hands again, then back at the maestro. When he spoke, his own voice was hoarse from disuse and effort, but calm. I had a teacher, a long time ago, who... Sterling took another step, his eyes wide, hungry for an answer that made sense. My mother. There was no more to say about that. It was a closed book. Sterling absorbed this. He looked from Leo's face to the piano, as if trying to reconcile the two. The trill in the middle section. It was uneven. The tempo in the asterisk presto asterisk. You rushed it. It was the critic speaking, the part of him that couldn't help but analyze. Leo nodded again. I know, but the asterisk feeling asterisk of it. Sterling trailed off. He seemed to be struggling, fighting against everything he believed. The way you leaned into the dissonance. You weren't afraid of it. You made it sound necessary. Leo didn't answer. He just watched the older man come apart and tried to put himself back together with new, unfamiliar pieces. Sterling moved closer, until he was at the foot of the stage, looking up. The dynamic between them had utterly inverted. He was the supplicant now. All this time? You've been here, listening, all this time? Every night, Leo said softly. A wave of something like pain crossed the maestro's face. He thought of all his lectures, his pronouncements, his casual cruelties delivered in this space, delivered in front of this man. He thought of the note. Asterisk, let's see the janitor's opinion on this. Asterisk, he felt a hot flush of shame so deep it was nausea. The note, Sterling said, his voice thick. It was a joke, a stupid, cruel. I never thought. I know, Leo said, and he did know. The joke had been the lock. His playing had been the key. Sterling looked lost. He, the man who always had the answer, who commanded every room, had no idea what to do or say. I must apologize. What I said before, what I implied, it was ignorant. It was asterisk wrong asterisk. The words seemed foreign in his mouth, but he forced them out. You have a profound gift. The word asterisk gift asterisk hung in the air. Leo had heard it before, from the only person whose opinion had ever mattered. Hearing it now, from this man, felt strange. It didn't fix anything. It didn't give him back the years. It's just something I can do, Leo said quietly. He stood up from the bench. His legs felt weak, but they held. He picked up his polishing cloth from where he'd left it on the piano lid. The simple, white cloth. He held it in his hands. The gesture was not lost on Sterling. It was a reminder of the world they were both from, the line that divided them, a line that, for a few minutes, had been completely erased. What happens now? Sterling asked. It was a genuine question. He was looking at a man who was, in that moment, a complete mystery to him. Leo looked around the hall, his place of work, his secret cathedral. He looked at the maestro, now just a confused, older man in the dim light. He thought of the ghost that had left him. He felt lighter. Nothing happens, Leo said. He meant it. He hadn't played for a job, or for fame, or to prove a point. He had played for the ghost, and the ghost was gone. I have floors to buff before sunrise. He started to walk toward the steps at the side of the stage, to return to his cart, to his world. Wait, Sterling's voice was urgent. He climbed the few steps to the stage, something like desperation in his movements. You can't go back to asterisk that asterisk. Not after this. I have connections. The conservatory, I could. There could be auditions, lessons. Leo stopped and turned. He looked at the maestro, and for the first time, there was a faint, tired smile on his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret. I'm 52 years old, he said simply. My hands hurt in the morning. The music. It was in here. He tapped his chest. It needed to get out. Now it's out. He saw that Sterling couldn't understand. For the maestro, music was a career, a ladder, a public thing. For Leo, it had always been a private language. Speaking it aloud, just once, had been enough, but it's a waste. Sterling insisted. The teacher in him horrified at the thought of such a talent being put back in a closet. It's not a waste, Leo said, his voice firmer now. It was a gift for me. Tonight, it was for me. He paused. And maybe for you. To listen. He left the maestro standing on the stage, the truth of those words settling over him like a cold, clear dawn. Leo walked down the steps, picked up the handle of his floor buffer, and flicked it on. The machine whirred to life, a mundane, grinding roar that filled the silence where the scriabin had been. He began to push it, making wide, careful arcs on the marble floor. He didn't look back. Maestro Sterling stood by the piano for a long time. He looked at the closed lid. He looked at the empty bench. He looked at the janitor, moving slowly and steadily under the house lights, doing his job. He thought of the first note, the one that had stopped him in the lobby, a sound of such deep, knowing gravity. He thought of the final, crashing chord, a sound of total release. He had come back for a scorebook. He had found a masterpiece, and then watched it walk away, back into the shadows. Finally, he moved. He walked to the conductor's stand and picked up his book. He started to leave, then stopped. He turned and walked back to the piano. He picked up the sheet music for Verse La Flamme. He carefully closed the book, his fingers lingering on the cover. He walked down the aisle, past the steady whir of the buffer. At the door, he paused and looked back one last time. The stage was empty. The hall was just a hall again. But for him, it would never be the same. He stepped out into the night, the scorebook held tightly under his arm. The city sounds rushed in cars, distant sirens. They sounded flat and meaningless. He could still hear, in the quiet center of his mind, the echo of that first, astonishing note. It wasn't just a sound. It was a question he had spent his whole life thinking he knew the answer to. And now, he realized, he didn't know anything at all.